All right. Hello, everybody. We're just going to take a moment to allow everyone to jump into the session. Hello, welcome. Good morning. Kia ora.
Woohoo.
I can see people have already kicked off with the comments, which is cool. Hi, Colleen from WA. Hello. Hi, Sam and Calissa from Child's Play in Point Cook in Victoria. Hello. Hi, Jenny from Bournemouth Village Kids in Hamilton. Hey, Lauren from Future Focus. Nice to see you again. Saw you yesterday. Hello. Hey, Joe from Perth. Is it nice and sunny over there? Hope. Rebecca also from Perth. Hello, hello. Cara from Sunbury. Hello, everybody. Won't be able to say hi to everyone, but hello, welcome everyone. We're so glad to have you with us, and so glad to have Nathan with us to really help us take that next step in understanding the neuroscience behind the early years and helping us also translate that into how we may be able to communicate about all of this with our whānau, with our family, with our colleagues, with our friends who, just before Nathan, we were just talking about how, there's a societal perception about ECE, but if they really understood the neuroscience of the early developing brain, I think maybe our societal perception would change. And but before we kick in and jump into all of that, we are just going to start with an acknowledgement of country. So, sorry, oops, wrong one. There we go. So we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we work and live on, honouring their elders past, present and emerging. We respect the deep connections with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, that they have with their country, and commit to learning from their wisdom as we build a shared future. I also want to pay respect to, I know we have a number of people joining us from Pacifica nations, from New Zealand and the Maori cultures there. I want to pay my respects to all of the First Nations people across all of the lands in which we're all sitting today. Now, just wanted to start by introducing ourselves. A lot of you know who we are. We're Mana. We're committed that every child has an extraordinary start to life. And today we have one of the most important people in our sector joining us, one of the advocates for our sector joining us, Nathan Wallis, who's going to run us through the second of a three-part series on the developing brain, on the neuroscience of the early years. And as I said today, we're really going to deep dive into the science and the neuroscience of the early years, and how we might be able to start to communicate that to our families, our whānau, to our colleagues, and to people outside of early childhood as well. It's part of our mission, and just for context, why are we even doing these webinars? It's part of Mana's mission, and I know it's part of Nathan's mission as well, that we elevate how the professional identity of the early years, we really have the biggest impact on human beings' lives. And I think Nathan will be the first one to tell us that these years, the first 1,000 days are the most important in a human being's lives. And if we get this right, then a lot of outcomes are deterministic from that point onwards. They're kind of fixed in for the most part from that point onwards. And if humanity understood this, then we would have a very different perception, and we'll put a very different focus and value on the early years. Everyone here knows it, and I think that's why you're here. That's why you've taken up the profession of early childhood. Being in whatever way you contribute to the early years. But I think what we want to do is really support the conversation to elevate who we are as a sector, and also support our understanding of that as well. Now, one last thing, Nathan, before I throw you straight in. We're really excited to hear, aren't we, from the group here today. Whatever questions you have, please feel free to throw them into the chat. I think a lot of people have now also engaged in the chat. As those questions come up, if I see questions that might be relevant to the conversation, I'll bring them in. But we also have a Q&A at the end where you can just ask whatever questions you have of Nathan or myself as well. Okay. We'll also have a number of polls that we run throughout today. That information will also help Nathan and I get a gauge of where we're at, and also, might be of interest to you as well. So feel free to engage in those if you think they're relevant.
Okay.
All right.
Yay.
Well, Nathan, let's kick off. Today we're talking about,
Okay.
today the title of today's webinar is From Science to Practice: Leadership Lessons of the Developing Brain. And so where I really wanted to start is maybe we just jump straight in and start with how do you simply explain child development and what happens to a child's brain to someone who's never thought about it before? A lot of fun, etc. Never thought about it before. So how would you explain that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just start off by thanking people that have turned up, because I know that it's easy just to watch this on video later. So, but we have designed this to be more interactive. So if they put questions halfway through, don't feel like you've got to wait till the end, mate. Interrupt me and take that question, because it's often just following the flow. And like, we've structured it where I'm not just going to be presenting at the camera for an hour. We are having a discussion based on the questions that you put forward from the last one. You're trying to link the stuff from last time, but also to, like you say, make it applicable straight to practice. So I always like to acknowledge your welcome to country, because I love you doing that. So yeah, thank you for that acknowledgement to country, and ka mihi nui ki ngā mana whenua o tēnā rohe. So, to the mob, wherever you are, huge mihi to you. Okay, how do we explain it in nice simple language to parents? I mean, I've spent a career trying to do this, really. Part of it is they have to know that you know the technical terms, but then you stop using the technical terms. So one of the big things is just what we talked about last week, brains, not last week, but last time, brains 1, 2, 3, and 4. If I talk about the cerebellum and the frontal cortex, that immediately alienates a whole lot of parents. And if we want to get that, like you said, out into the culture, so we change things, because I do think that's huge. I mean, there's no dispute about this information. It's been there for 30 years. It's brain scan based. It's referenced. It's triangulated. It's as solid a research as you can possibly get. And yet you still have parents getting together after the antenatal class with a secret competition over whose baby's going to walk first and whose baby's going to sleep through the night first. And you still have parents that think if your kid reads at 4, he's going to be a genius. And if he doesn't read till 7, he's going to be done. Like, culture seems to really just override all of that. So we've got the research for supporting us. It's how do we use that research in ways that actually helps to change the culture. So I think that is about, generally as a form of communication, you always acknowledge where someone's coming from rather than correcting people. As a teacher, it never works very well when you say, you should know. No, this is actually right. It doesn't matter if you're right. You've alienated the learner. So I think when they come in with something really bizarre, I want my 2-year-old learning to read, I would always start off with, well, good on you for wanting to be involved in your child's education, for being that passionate about it, and actually coming in and opening up the dialogue and the conversation. Because a lot of parents don't do that. They dump and run. So, I'm always pleased to engage with parents like you that really want to be involved. So, yeah. And let me assure you, if learning to read at 2 was going to give him the best outcomes, we'd be right there doing it. Absolutely. But, and then you've got to think of a way to explain it to people in ways that isn't going to be too long and boring, because you're often doing this at drop off and pick up. You've got a couple of minutes. So that's why I developed that thing of calling them brains 1, 2, 3, and 4. And saying, so I would say to a parent that said that I want my 2-year-old to learn to read, I would say, good on you for being involved. It's really important that your 2-year-old be immersed in a world of literacy and have all the things we associate with literacy, symbols, all around them, and being immersed in that environment. But literacy is essentially something that happens up in brain number 4. And it takes you about, on average, about 27 years to get all 4 brains online. And that brain number 4, where literacy is, doesn't even really start center stage development until somewhere around 7. So, what's the foundation for that brain? You might just think of it as the emotional brain. Its real name's the limbic system. But that's all the things like that are going to empower their learning. It's going to empower them to be a learner, to learn literacy. Like, how long do they focus their attention for? How much do they persevere through failure? So yeah, I would get more complex with teachers and say that's why we have a social emotional curriculum rather than a cognitive curriculum. But yeah, already I'm getting too complex for parents at a drop off. But I think the key features are show the names of the brainstem, the cerebellum, the limbic system, and the cortex, but then call them brains 1, 2, 3, and 4. I think that allows parents to engage in the conversation.
And so can you help us kind of, for us of fast mere mortals, Nathan, who are
Yeah.
still learning brains 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Yep.
Can you help us could you go through each one and the role that it plays and
Yep.
when they come
Absolutely.
on?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I think like brain number one at the base of your neck is your survival brain. Of course that's got to be number one because survival's at the basis of everything you do. You can't do literacy if you don't have a beating heart. So of
Mm.
course that's fairly basic. And that's why just about all creatures that move, all life that moves has a brainstem. Keeps your heart beating, keeps you breathing. It's a home of fight, flight, or freeze. Brain number two, the bulgy bit, is your movement brain. So, yeah, I mean, you have to go over this stuff multiple times because I think we went over exactly this last time, didn't we? But it's just to understand that, you see your baby in the first 6 months does not get up and walk around the house because movement is brain number two, not brain number one. That
Mm.
first 6 months, they're primarily concerned with finding their attachment figure because that's how they're going to survive. That's our best survival our best survival method is to get someone to fall madly, deeply in love with us. So much so that that person's willing to give up their life to protect us. That's the number one thing that we need to do. So we're very cute as babies. We have larger eyes. Like they say, you're born with your eyes the same size they'll be as an adult, and then the rest of your face grows into your eyes. So
Right.
so that's why babies appear to have large eyes. So large eyes releases oxytocin, the hormone that in fact, this is the same for models on magazine covers. Models aren't trying to make their eyes look squinty so they look really interested in you. They're trying to make their eyes look as big and doughy as possible because that's what releases oxytocin. It's part of that survival attachment. Even people that think they don't like babies, acting like a big macho Australian man, when their brain sees a baby, there's an automatic biological release of "Oh," even if they cover it up because that's oxytocin. It's a part of our survival. We need it. So in the first 6 months, that's what baby's looking for, to feel safe, to
So
feel
brain one
connected.
is essentially developing in the first 6 months. Some of brain two
Yep.
is kind of coming online as well, I'm guessing, because
Yep.
yeah.
They always overlap. I mean, a baby doesn't stay dead still and start doing movement at 6 months of age. They do all
Mm.
the pre-movement stuff. And that's the theme throughout the brain. Like the literacy that we talk about at 7, of course, there's pre-literacy going on using symbols and stuff. I remember my 6-year-old grandson getting a stick
Mm.
and drawing into the what do you call them, wood chips in the
Mm.
playground, and he drew a thing that sort of looked like a backwards question mark with a twirl in the center and stuff, and he said that says power because that's my name. So that's not literacy because that's not how you spell power. You spell
Mm.
power Poua, but he made up a symbol, so I know he's using symbolic thinking that symbolizes power to him. So I know he was 6 years old then, and that might be behind what the school wants, but I know he's well on track because
Mm.
that's all the pre-literacy behaviors. So you have the pre-movement behaviors, the baby wandering their limbs around, but essentially most movement comes online between 6 and 18 months. Because we do
Mm.
attachment first, then movement, and then around this 18 months, we move into that social emotional brain. And that's what early childhood teachers really need to be an expert on, this limbic system. Because our
Mm.
whole curriculum is called, cognitive curriculums focus on cognitive things in the cortex, literacy, numeracy. So primary school, secondary school, all have cognitive curriculums. But early childhood is unique because it has a social emotional curriculum.
Mm.
Because it's got what all of the researchers told us well before brain scans, just knowing through observation. I mean, Piaget knew a lot of this, and he didn't have brain scans.
Mm.
Um, that's because your emotional brain is to do with how you feel as a learner. When you get frustrated, do you feel, oh, I'm not going to be able to do it, I'm useless and I'm stupid, and do you give up straight away? Or when you feel frustrated as a learner, do you go, oh no, other times this has happened, I've just had to keep focusing for a couple more minutes and usually I work it out? How you
Mm.
feel about yourself as a learner. And
Mm.
we call them dispositions. So the
Mm.
one like the ones I've already mentioned. Do you give up as soon as it gets hard? Do you persevere through failure? Do
Mm.
you focus your attention for 10 seconds at a time? Or can you focus your attention for minutes at a time?
Mm.
All of that's going to determine how well you learn literacy, numeracy, the exam results you get. All of that relies on the dispositions that you
Mm.
develop from basically 2 to 7. And
Yeah.
those dispositions are also the reason why this is where your resilience comes from. So this is why when we look overall at all the different research, the more free play there is, which our society thinks are the kids doing nothing because they're just damming creeks and stuff. They don't understand the development of dispositions in free play. So it looks like because they're not being instructed like our stereotypical understanding of learning is, the teacher at the front, the teacher's the knower, holds the knowledge, you're the empty vessels that they're filling up. I
Mm.
mean, you got away with that in 1840, but we've moved on since then. And if they don't understand that, then yeah, the the dispositions that make you intelligent are also going to make you resilient.
Mm,
When you feel overwhelmed and feel like you're stupid and useless, because I can guarantee at some stage of life you're going to feel that. Everybody is. Life is not heaven. Life is not all good feelings. You're going to have the whole plethora of emotions, and there's going to be times when you feel not as good as other people and you feel broken or whatever. Um, yeah, do you have the disposition that sort of says, "Oh, I know how to express my feelings. I know how to go and talk to someone about that because a problem shared is a problem halved." Do I have those dispositions, or do I have a disposition that says, "No, I'm stupid, and I shouldn't feel that way"? And your
mm,
dispositions. Do you persevere through failure? Isn't just about academic learning. It's
mm,
about the feelings of failure. You
mm,
know, yeah. So there's a direct correlation between the more free play you have under seven, the less statistical chance there is you'll have anxiety, depression, and suicide as a teenager. The
wow.
more they interrupt your play, and the more they do be like a primary school teacher and bring you to the mat and get you ready for primary school. And I know we have to do some of that because we have to compromise because we don't live in a culture of people that are as evolved as early childhood teachers that
Mm,
understand the neuroscience. We live in that society that still thinks it's a race.
mm,
So we do have to do some, and that's what's difficult for early childhood teachers is the
mm,
science says don't do it. The ministry says do it. Society says
mm,
do it. So we have to try and marry those together in some way that's
mm,
respectful of children, puts in place the stuff that's going to make them resilient and intelligent, but we have to meet those needs as well in some
mm.
way. Um, well, I
Well,
think
I
I've gone.
think that's an interesting segue because we're today here talking about leadership lessons, right? As well
Yeah,
from early childhood, and just earlier, you and I offline were talking about how early childhood has really led the way in so many different ways, and we were talking
yeah,
actually about biculturalism and how early
yeah,
childhood set the framework for that for the whole of society to start to
yeah.
adopt that. A question for you is: do you think the leaders here should, take that same lesson potentially when it comes to, human development? I mean, we understand so well the
Hmm.
negative impacts of like having structured, instructional methodology. What you were talking
Yeah,
about is more that instructional, we know the
yeah.
negative impacts of that. Is there something we can take from that from a leadership perspective? And
Yeah, well, because I've worked right across the sectors. I even worked in secondary school, not as a teacher, but as a counsellor for a while. Um, like secondary principals know the best teachers to employ are the ones who are primary trained. And a lot of that's just to do with the fact that you have to go to teachers college for 4 years to train as a primary school teacher. You only have to go as 1 year to train as a secondary school teacher. It's because I worked at teachers college for a long time. So you already have a degree, you get 1 year. You don't have time to teach people how kids learn in 1 year. You've only got time to teach them what they need to teach. What are the assessment tools? What do you need to do? So they have very little idea of how kids learn. That's why you get a lot of secondary school teachers that just act like the kid's supposed to be an adult and I'm only going to teach the kids that are actually here to bloody learn, and they don't want to do the extra stuff to engage them, and they don't feel obliged to be interesting. They just think that they're an information giver out the front of the class, and it's up to the kid to self-regulate and learn. And about a third of the kids will. I always say the Charlottes and the Georges, the really good kids that are all self-motivated and lovely and so easy to teach.
the
What
Nathans,
COVID
of course. Yeah.
what COVID taught us is that those kids don't even need a teacher. Those kids excelled in their exams during COVID without a teacher. They actually, because they're so self-motivated and stuff. So a lot of secondary school teachers think they're the only ones that they're supposed to teach, and it's the other kids' faults. But I think if you think you're only supposed to teach that easy third, then your job's easy, you get too many holidays and you're overpaid. Because that's not difficult. Those kids can do it by themselves at home. And then there's a third of the class in the middle that you can sway with, and bring them interested if you've got the right relationship and stuff. But primary school teachers make better secondary school teachers because they understand that. They
Mm,
understand it's about knowing their student, about the relationship, about remembering the kid's pet dog's name if this pet dog's the most important to them and stuff. But it's early childhood that actually leads that. We have the relationship based curriculum. We are at the time when the brain, of said, is really focused on social emotional aspects of learning, the dispositions you'll carry on forever. So early childhood does really lead that. And
mm,
in primary schools, guess who makes the best primary school teachers? Early childhood teachers. because the younger the learner, the more you have to know how to engage them. You can't sit in front of a bunch of 2-year-olds and go, right, everybody self-regulate and listen to me spell off the curriculum, because you're just gonna, we all laugh at that because it's not going to work. But that means an early childhood teacher becomes an expert and knowing how to engage students, how to build on their interests, how to give them autonomy in their learning. They early childhood teachers more than others, I think, know that it's just as important how the student feels as it is what they know. If I know how to count to 100, but you say to me, oh, well, your older brother could count to 110 by your age, then I'm left as someone who can count to 100 feeling a bit dumb. Whereas if I count to 20 and you celebrate that with me, because yesterday I could only count to 15, and oh my goodness, today you got to 20, and that's amazing, and how did you do that? And you empower me as the learner. I really think our job as early childhood teachers, we're more facilitators than we are teachers. We want to facilitate the child's sense of discovery, because that's a disposition that they will, if they think they're in charge of their learning and they're discovering. Learning is actually about the most exciting thing in the world. Like, it is fun. It's amazing to learn new stuff and have that aha moment.
Yeah.
And we often, I think, the higher up the sector we get, the more we take that away from the kids and just say, I'm the holder of the right answer and I'm testing you as to whether you've got the right answer. When I say 2 and 2, no, you said 5, no, that's wrong. I'm denying you the opportunity to discover that 2 plus 2 is 4. So I think, early childhood teachers do lead the way. I mean, I said to you earlier, we saw that in cultural stuff. That New Zealand has quite a racist history as well, and so there was a not wanting to learn Māori and stuff. But early childhood teachers just saw how crucial it was, especially to the identity of Māori kids, but how it benefited everybody. So early childhood teachers fought against, not fought, that's not the wrong word. They spearheaded a cultural movement that wasn't that popular at the start. They did start using Māori songs. They did start the day with Māori karakia, and it was all token for a start because that's all they had access to. People get hit roadblocks all the time. They'd write to the local, we call them the runanga, or the local council, you'd call them a local mob. And the government doesn't fund a bunch of them there to go out and educate people in centres and stuff. So the letter's received by someone who works at the local meatworks and has got 6 kids of his own and is already dealing with intergenerational poverty and stuff. And then he's got to try and find time to go to the early childhood centre, and he's probably not dressed appropriately and stuff. So those teachers had to see past that and just have the waiata, even though they didn't have the elder there. Have the song, even though they didn't have the elder there. And what we saw was all parents were just enamored with the fact that their children could be bilingual. A lot of their racism disappeared when their kid come home and could count in te reo Māori, and they just thought their kid was so clever. And then they're open to the fact that the science tells us, yes, they are cleverer. It's not just your perception. Bilingual children, like we talked about last time, resiliency, how it changes the brain. Bilingual children are actually more intelligent. So it's been very rewarding for us to see early childhood spearhead the way for all of that. And they were doing it for years. We had to deal for a long time in New Zealand with the fact that kids went to early childhood and received a bicultural education and then went to school and it disappeared. There's a whole generation. It took a while for primary school to catch up. And frankly, secondary school is still catching up. I think unless you're selected as a subject, if I'm the science teacher, I don't have to do anything inclusive of Māori. It's taken them a while to catch up because they do receive less training and less teachers' college and stuff. But now, at least 50% of primary schools actively embrace Māori culture. And that might not sound like a lot, only 50%, but it's a lot more than there used to be. And I would say, you could never say 100%, but 99% of early childhood teachers have been embracing that for 20 years. So they spearheaded that. And I think, it's the same thing with brain development. Do we need for people to understand the value of relationships and the value of play? I think that's a huge part of it. We have to get parents to understand play is not a waste of time.
Well, I think, sorry, Nathan, if we just double click onto that. So I think maybe if we can start to create some language around this as well, because as you said, how do we explain this to families? How to explain this to our, I also had that pub test of being a male in early childhood education. Probably like 15 years ago, I was like ashamed, right? Like it was very uncommon. There was like a real identity thing for me. Only when I started.
It's like being a hairdresser. Everyone assumes you're gay. And it is. That's just the assumption that goes with it.
And I think for me, the awakening was like, wow, outcomes being fixed in, well, like you say, 83% of outcomes get fixed in by the age of 5, I think.
Yeah,
There's a 17 to 1 times impact that you have in early childhood compared to
yeah.
different, like it's incredible the impact we have. But I want to
Hmm.
actually talk about dispositions,
Yep.
skills, and knowledge, because, when we think
Right.
of teaching, there's like these three things that we can provide,
Yeah.
impart,
Yeah.
support, empower, enable, whatever language it
Mm.
is, right?
Yeah.
So, a lot of the time, and, I think we as a profession probably don't have maybe we're still developing the language to help kind of correlate these. Could you
Yeah.
help us like run through, like, you talked a lot about dispositions. I think we were
Yeah.
talking about counting, let's say counting to skill, or
Yeah.
maybe
That's a
some knowledge
skill. Yeah.
there as well.
Knowledge. Yeah.
But like help distinguish those, and like, can you help us like see how that is like related to the brain and the brain development?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think skills and knowledge are about that brain number 4, the cortex. Literacy is up in brain number 4. I mean, it's literally everything that you can do that an animal can't do is up there on brain number 4. Animals can't count, they can't read. Um, but so skills and knowledge, I think, I mean, you could say animal has knowledge, so that's not necessarily up in the frontal cortex. And I'm simplifying it because mammals have a tiny little stump of a frontal cortex. I often say to people, when you get the dog lead out of the hot water cupboard, the dog runs to the front door. So he knows, he's predicting the future. He knows you're going to take him for a walk. But he doesn't know what he's going to be doing tomorrow. Or, a human can plan, you can plan what you're going to be doing in 20 years, what you plan for your retirement. So a dog's got a stump of a frontal cortex, so they have a little bit of it, but essentially skills and knowledge, I think, are associated with that frontal cortex. Whereas your dispositions are that limbic system that is brain number 3, the foundation for and animals can do that. Animals can persevere through difficulty. They hunt down the first, rabbit, they miss it, they go back again. They persevere through difficulty. They they know when to seek assistance from others. These are all dispositions, but your dispositions is what leads to skills and knowledge. I mean, I would say in a simple way, dispositions are how you feel about yourself as a learner. You know, if you think, I think a lot of my success in the education system come from the fact that I come from how would you say it, working class background where everyone was an alcoholic and there's lots of abuse and stuff, and people weren't particularly bright. I have to be careful about saying this because I don't want to insult my family, right? I've got 60 cousins on my mother's side, and I'm living really close to them all now. So I don't
Yeah.
mean I am more intelligent than them. I don't mean that at all. I mean I know that I'm more qualified than them, and I stayed at school and stuff. No one else. I've got one other cousin that got school certificate, yeah, which is fifth form level. I don't know what that equates
Yeah.
to in Australia, but that means
Same. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
the very first qualification. And I think a lot of my success come from the fact that people around me saw me as really clever because I could do things that if I was in a normal middle class family, or if I was in a family with academic parents, it would not have been seen as clever. It would have just been seen as average. But
Right.
I got told right from the start, man, you're brainy, man, you're clever. And so that belief gave me a disposition that gave me confidence that I was clever. And then if you're confident, you develop dispositions like when I think I've got something wrong, I don't go, oh, shut down with shame. I go, oh, how did I get that wrong? What did I miss? Because I've got the confidence that I'm not dumb. So if I got it wrong, I must have missed something. So that's a disposition. Whereas I often think if I'd had an older brother who was, Rhodes Scholar, or an older sister that was Rhodes Scholar, I wouldn't have developed the same dispositions.
Right.
So yeah.
Interesting.
And doing things earlier than people around you expect means that you get to be in charge of your own learning. When you're
Mm.
doing things slower than people expect, they start trying to pull you up and you get a negative disposition. I'm not good enough. This
Mm.
example I used about, I said about counting to 100. If I can count to 100 and you're left with going, well, I thought you'd be able to count to 110, then it doesn't matter I can count to 100. I'm better off to be able to count to 20 and think I'm a genius than count to 110 and think I'm dumb. Your
Mm.
dispositions are what informs how much you try, whether you keep going, your sense of your self-esteem, your sense of self-worth, your sense of being in charge of your own learning, your belief that you will eventually get it. And it's
Mm.
interesting when you study human IQ, there's not that much difference. We have this whole, like I said, with me and my cousins, because they work in the meatworks and the shearing sheds, the outside, and I was a university lecturer, then the outside perception is I'm clever and they're not so clever, but that's not really how intelligence works. I'll have
That's
cousins that are cleverer than me in lots of aspects of life.
wow.
Um, anyway, I lost my point of view there. But
No, no, I
that's the
think
conversation model.
well, that's really clear, right? So, it sounds like if I summarize what you just said, in the early years, really, we're developing the third brain primarily,
Yep.
the limbic
Hmm.
system.
Yep.
And the limbic system, how we feel about ourselves and how we feel about learning, is
Yeah.
essentially the foundation for learning in the future, right? So
Yep.
I have confidence, like you said, if we have 20, if I can count to 20, but I feel great, I feel like a genius around it,
Yeah.
it's building a disposition of confidence when it comes to learning.
Yeah.
If every time I fall down, I feel like I can get back up, I'm building a
Yep.
disposition to resilience. You
Yep.
know, if I so essentially, just we're really shaping, like, all of those are, interestingly, and I used to say this of being a lot, so I'm going to try and pull that in. You
Yep.
know, builders build buildings,
Yep. Yep.
chefs cook food.
Yep.
We, as early childhood professionals, create identities.
Yes.
Because if you think about it, those dispositions are
They
how
are.
we relate to ourselves, right?
Hmm.
People say, I am confident, I am not confident, I am smart, I am
Yep.
dumb. All of
Yep.
those dispositions are like our identity, how we view
Hmm.
ourselves.
Yep.
And they're formed, it seems like, in the early years.
Yes. I
Yeah.
agree 100%. Yeah, I mean, when you think of when you work around people with learning disabilities, I've got friends that are older than me that later in life get diagnosed with dyslexia. So their brains, they had an extra challenge. When you look at brain scans, dyslexia, the easiest way to explain it is when you don't have dyslexia, if I walk out of my front gate of my house and I need to go to school and school's next door to my right, the brain without dyslexia turns right. So it's a very short journey to school. The brain with dyslexia turns left and has to go all the way around the block. So they still learn to do it, but against all the odds because it's so much harder for them. Um, but if they don't know that, I've got friends with dyslexia that have little statements like, "Oh, well, I'm not that bright, but I would have thought," and they are so bright. And I try and convince them, I show all the others, you've invented this. I've got a friend that's an inventor. He does all this intricate jewelry stuff. You can talk to him on an intellectual level about, physics and really deep things. He understands all of that. His cognition is incredibly sharp. But because he had these learning difficulties, he developed an identity early on where he was told he was dumb. I mean, I was really good at spelling. I've just got a good memory. I don't think that makes me clever. But I could, because I could spell though, then people told me I was clever. Then I felt clever. I think if you've got something like dyslexia, unless you've got, good parents and a good environment around you, it's so easy just to think, oh, I am dumb, because especially the old days of school was so focused on spelling and reading. And if you read early and you spelled early, people told you were clever. And really, that's just memorization. That's not even depth of cognition. But my depth of cognition developed because I was told I was clever. Yeah.
Nice. Hey, Nathan, we just got a question. I'm just going to pull that up
Yep.
on the stream now. Very cool. I love this. So, question, Nathan, you've talked about the importance of having right and wrong answers to questions.
Hmm.
And Jenny has asked, can we talk a little bit more about that? And I'm guessing this is
Yeah,
a
absolutely.
position of resilience. But yeah, I'll let you dive
It's a
in.
great question. It's a great question. It was what I was thinking in my mind. So, when we have right and wrong answers, we're basically saying, I am the knower and you are the not knower. And, what letter is this? And if I'm holding up a B and you say any other letter, you're wrong. So, the disposition developed as the teacher is the knower, I'm the not knower. When we use open ended things, Play Doh. Then there's no right and wrong way, or even Lego. There's no right and wrong way of doing that. I often use the example of damming a creek that goes through the centre. There's no right one way of damming the creek. When we use open-ended things, not only does it not shut down the learner, but it develops those dispositions of being in charge of their learning, of persevering through failure. Because there is no right and wrong way of building a Play-Doh house. So the fear of getting it wrong, which develops those really negative positions and shuts the kids down, is why open-ended resources are so highly valued in early childhood. In fact, Harvard University did a study on the resources that actually in early childhood centres create the most intelligence. It was a very comprehensive study, and they found, number one and two are probably not that surprising. Number one was a stick, and number two was a ball, and number three was Lego. Yeah, it's probably because Lego can be used in an open-ended way, but the same way that a stick can be used as a heaven forbid, a gun or a magic Harry Potter wand or a broom, or, it can be used for a million different things. It's open-ended. A ball can be used for a million different things. They are the things that Harvard University found actually stimulated intelligence far more than like puzzles, jigsaw puzzles, which have a right, wrong way of doing things. Teachers setting up sort of testing environments. It's the process of discovery. You're not doing discovery when you're in a right, wrong answer, when there's a closed right, wrong thing. So, and I think life's going to be full of right, wrong answers, but there's going to be plenty of time to develop them later on. What's going to drive your ability to engage with those right, wrong answers is open-ended resources. So yeah, they're powerful.
Can I actually deep dive into that a little bit? And maybe on a
Yep.
more sticky point, which is, I guess it comes back to culture, but pro-social behaviors, right? So,
Yep.
where we as a society have defined particular, you know,
Yep.
social norms, and we're supporting
Yep.
children in adherence to those social norms. Let's say,
Yep.
whatever that is. Like, how
Yeah.
might we take a more open-ended view to pro-social development
Yeah.
versus,
I think, yeah. I think my way of doing that was to, first of all, we said last time, all behavior is communication. So I don't really see naughty behavior. I mean, I'm a human being like anybody else. If someone smacks me around the head, if you smack me around the head, I would think it was misbehavior because you're an adult with a frontal cortex who understands consequences. If a 2-year-old smacks me around the head, I'm more likely to think that's frustration. What would that be communicating? It's often communicating, you're not listening to me. So I'm feeling frustrated. And it's not a naughty thing. That 2-year-old doesn't have the skills or the articulation to know how to express that. So the way they express themselves is with a whack. Um, yeah, pro-social behaviors, to develop those, then when instead of saying, you should have used your words, or you should have asked me for a turn, I might say something more like, I check out, are you feeling frustrated, mate? Naming the behavior for them can, immediately calm down the limbic emotional brain. We see that on a brain scan. As soon as you name the emotion, there's less electricity in the amygdala, which leaves more electricity to go up to the frontal cortex, where pro-social good behavior is. I might say that, early childhood teachers know this, is when you say things like, what's another way we could have got the toy off Himal, other than smack them over the head? Have you seen anyone else doing it? Let's have a look around and see when someone else wants a toy. Let's take notice and see what they do. And then we see little Charlotte again. Charlotte goes up and asks someone for a turn, and they go, "Oh, look, that was really successful. Do you think you might try that? Do you want Nathan to help you with that? Like, okay, well, we can see little Bobby's over there, and so you want the tractor. So maybe you could just go up to Bobby and say, can I please have a turn with that tractor after you? And then we might talk about, and what happens where Bobby might not want to give you the turn of the tractor, so you might have to wait. I'm not telling him how to do it. I'm
yeah.
trying to get strategies from him. So I'm scaffolding that, but it's
Mm,
taking myself out of the situation of being the knower who knows how to do this. And even if he comes up with a strategy that I don't think is the best strategy, I let him, as the little scientist I see him as, explore that strategy, even if I think it's going to fail. So he
mm,
might think, oh, yeah, you can think of that strategy. What's a strategy that's not going to be that successful? He'll think, I could go and bake him some scones and see if he will then give me the tractor. I'm making that up as I go, but then we work out the logistics of making scones, and then it's going to be lunchtime, and the scones won't be ready yet. And so yeah, but I'd still celebrate. I do like the idea of giving him something. Is there something we can get maybe that's quicker for us to make the scones? Maybe we could
mm,
make pretend scones out of Play-Doh, and you could take those over to Bobby and say, look, I made these for you because I wondering if I could have a turn with the tractor after you. Yeah, you
mm,
see what I'm saying? I'm
yeah.
allowing him to formulate hypotheses and
Mm,
then to test his hypotheses. And I'm there as the facilitator. Free play does not mean I'm standing around talking to other teachers about what I did on the weekend.
mm,
That's neglect, right? Free play is that I am not in charge of the kids' learning. I am scaffolding his learning. I'm
mm,
facilitating his or her learning. I'm empowering them as a learner. And I'm almost, I see it, I'm empowering them as a little scientist. They're
mm,
out, scientifically working out what's the best strategy for me to do these
mm,
things. And when I do that and I empower his own learning, and it might take, weeks before he learns how to ask Bobby for a turn. And it seems like it would have been much quicker if I just said to him, mate, you need to go up to Bobby and say, can I please have a turn after you?
mm,
But it doesn't give him the same sense of discovery.
mm,
Discovery is so powerful for developing your dispositions. A simpler example, when I give the kid a jack in the box and I go, look, you pull the switch and bang, it pops out. You've just destroyed, their discovery. They already, and now it's only used for one thing. You give that kid the same Jack in the Box and don't give him any instructions, and he thinks it's a step for getting up to get a drink from the tap. So you help him to do that. He thinks it's got a monster living inside it. So we write letters to the monster and stuff. Could be weeks before he works out that pulling that lever, this thing jumps out of it.
Mm.
But two things. One is he's learned 100 different ways of using that box. You've developed creativity. He's developed the disposition of having autonomy in his learning and leading his own learning. And then when he does discover that, that it pops
Mm.
out, he will feel like he is the first person in the world to have discovered that. And that will give him a love of learning that you just can't put a value on. So I think the overall message I'm trying to say is it's about the journey, not the outcome. I
Yeah.
think primary school is very focused on the outcome. Secondary school is very focused on your exam results and your outcome. Early childhood is focused on the journey.
Mm.
How you get there is going to determine how you feel as a learner. And that's going to determine the dispositions that you have for the rest of your life. So many people would send as a counsellor, would send their teenagers to me with all of these mental health issues that are all basically defeatist, given up, it's no point, I'm useless, I'm not as good as other people. All those things were developed in early childhood, and 99% of those kids were environments where they would be encouraged to learn to read and write and sit down and do as they're told and get ahead of other people and be competitive and not left to persevere through failure, building a dam in the creek. That's the same disposition they need now to get through teenage, mental illness.
Yeah.
So it becomes quite clear why there is that solid correlation between how much free play you have in early childhood means you're the more resilient as a teenager. So
Mm.
somehow we have to communicate that to parents. And I think the key for that is about the four brains and
Mm.
understanding that early childhood teachers are working with the emotional brain. I know I'm talking a lot, but we always have to value what they bring to it. You always have to say, I'm glad that you're focused on literacy and numeracy. So are we. But I would be a bit sarcastic as as a teacher, which I don't recommend you do. But I would be like, I'm really focused on his literacy and numeracy. But 4 years at teachers' college taught me that. That's my subtle way of saying, it's like I have trained for this. Do you question your surgeon about how they're going to do the operation because you think you've got a better idea? um, but you have to, without that animosity, put it across that if that was the best thing to sit a 2-year-old down and teach him to read. We
Mm.
did start out doing that. If you go back in our history early on, we did
Mm.
believe that. And there's still a large cultural belief that the earlier you do things, the earlier they will, the brainier they will be. But what, hundreds of years of study and 4 years at university for me taught was that that's not how the brain works. There's four
Mm.
brains in the head, and the dispositions, what we're doing in this age is the dispositions that are going to drive their learning. So that's why we value free play. If I drag Bobby over and say, this is how you draw an R, we know that on average he can focus his attention for about 2 minutes, 7 minutes to the max. If we leave Bobby wasting his time building a dam through the creek, he focuses his attention for somewhere between 14 and 17 minutes. A kid who can focus their attention for 14 to 17 minutes when problem solving, is always going to be better, brainier, more intelligent than a kid who can only focus their attention for 2 to 7
Mm.
minutes. So we have to develop those dispositions, and
Mm.
there's plenty of time at primary school. I mean, I love that sentence, cognitive results plateau at 8. It's probably the most common sentence I've used in my whole career. Cognitive results being literacy and numeracy. Plateau, even out at 8. I mean, that's the academic way of saying whether you learn to read at 4 or whether you learn to read at 7. By the age of 8, nobody can tell for the rest of your life. The little Charlottes and Georges who are reading when they got to school do not have a higher reading age at 9 or at 8
Mm.
than the Jadens and the Nathans and the
Mm.
Himals who didn't learn who were just being naughty and wouldn't sit still enough to learn that stuff. And they've caught up by the time they're 8. I mean,
Mm.
there is an underbelly, obviously. There's kids that come from severe trauma that stay way behind, but that's not an issue with early childhood so much. That's an issue with that first 3 years and the home environments and our huge rates of domestic violence and the colonisation, and those are the things that drive that. So we've already talked about some of that, and we as early childhood teachers can help to undo that. We undo some of the effects of colonisation by valuing Aboriginal culture and Māori culture in New Zealand. But what I'm saying is, I don't know if, yes, there's an underbelly, but
Mm.
those underbelly aren't fixed by teaching them to read it too. those underbelly would have to be fixed by, as a society bigger than early childhood, addressing intergenerational poverty and
Mm,
addressing addiction and addressing
mm,
poor mental health and addressing colonisation, subjects that people, politicians are often more focused on the economy and not too interested in those societal problems.
mm.
So I don't think we can fix all of that. But luckily, it's only a minority that form
I
that
mean,
underbelly.
we can't fix it at a society level, but we can fix it for our community. We can fix it for
Yeah,
that individual child, and I think as a function of that, change the world at least for them. And I think that's what
absolutely.
we should
Yep.
do. Yeah,
Yeah,
but
and that's what we
absolutely.
talked about last time. We do that by having one consistent relationship. If that kid does come from a once warrior's home, I mean, I'm passionate about foster kids because I was a foster kid, and we have all the stats on foster kids, and we see that. So as soon as a child comes into your centre that is in foster care, they are the kid that is most likely to be in prison as an adult. And so,
Mm,
and why is that? It's an inconsistency of relationship. So the first thing you can do is attach that kid to one primary person, and they stay attached to that person for the whole time that they're there. And they are transient. They might only be there for 3 months, but they might be there for 4 years. And if they can have one consistent relationship for 4 years, not the 2-year-old teacher and then the 3-year-old teacher and then the 4-year-old teacher, Charlotte and Georgia can handle that because they've already got a secure base from their diet. They probably come from a wealthier family, they had an at-home parent and stuff. But if that kid's in foster care, been removed, you have 8 different placements on average, then the best thing we can do is give them one relationship. So he
mm,
has like one of the teachers becomes like a mother, and the other teachers are all like an auntie.
mm.
So the kid doesn't need 4 aunties. They need a mother and 3 aunties.
Yeah,
So
gotcha.
one consistent relationship. Yeah.
There's a really great comment here from Angela that says, just to your earlier point, connection instead of correction, the right and wrong.
Yes, yes, I love that. Yeah,
Echoes
print that on t-shirts. It is so true. You know, you
Uh,
don't
we'll,
you don't
we'll
help
print
them in
your
learning at
face
all when you
and
correct
then
them.
correction or connection instead of correction.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love it. I mean,
Actually,
even as adults, we don't like it, do we? When someone interrupts your conversation to correct your pronunciation of a word or something, it means you're not actually listening to what I'm trying to say.
mm,
You're coming over the top. There's a disconnect. So I think, yeah, it's so true, so true. That's one of those pearls of wisdom. Connection, not correction.
there we go. We have learned something. I've learned many things. I think we've got a new catchphrase as well: connection,
Yeah, absolutely.
connection,
Let's adopt that.
correction.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, just we're just. Can you believe we've done? That's gone 50 minutes.
Yeah, I know. I prepared all this stuff and we're not getting anywhere near most of it because, I mean, I like this conversation style because I think it's easier for people to listen to and more meaningful.
Mm,
I am wary of repeating stuff, like some of the questions. I mean, I want to build on the last times, but when people say to me, "What's the most effective way to build this, to explain this to parents?" That's effectively why I brought it down to the scales, where your survival brain's on one side of and your learning brain's on the other. So if I want the kid to be up here, getting brainy and learning, he needs to feel safe and calm. If I'm, oh no, look, I told you the answer before, and I'm getting angry with the kid and scaring him, it's impossible for him to learn. That is the So I think communicate to parents about the scales inside every human being's mind because they can all relate to that. They all know when they're being yelled at, they can't think of the answer. And that's why I put it into session one because I think some of the simplest ways of communicating this is brains one, two, three, and four. And you as educators, you can't, you hear that the first time and it sort of clicks because you're early childhood teachers, you have some basic understanding of human development anyway. But you really have to engage with that about 90 times before your brain myelinates all the pathways to really be able to hold on to that and understand that. So I think if you just take those four concepts, the four brains and the scales, and have them visually up in the center. I might actually have a big set of scales in the entry, a big picture of scales, or even real scales, and have a brain, and put the cortex on one side, and probably they won't recognize a brain stem, but something that would represent fear or something. I might put a tiger or something on the other side to represent the
mm,
brainstem. I'm making this up because I encourage all of them to, appropriate it for their own self. But I might do that. And the entranceway, there's a big set of scales, and there's a short explanation above about cortex and brainstem. And that when one's engaged, the other one's offline. They work like they're on a set of scales. And so, you can even get the kid to sort of show where they're at when they come to centre. They can, play with the scales and they can push the brain one down and have the tiger way up here because I'm angry today because mummy said she was going to blah, 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 and they express how they're feeling. Or they can go, no, I'm really happy today because tomorrow's my birthday and mum dropped me off, and they can use it and the parents can see what the explanation is. I think those are the simple ways to put it across to parents. Brains 1, 2, 3, and 4. But
Yeah.
let them know, it's called the neurosequential model, because they need to think you're not a dumb early childhood teacher. Our society thinks, when I went to the guidance counsellor to say I wanted to be an early childhood teacher, I think I told you this, she said, I'll save that for the dummies. You're in the top stream. You could be a primary school teacher or a secondary school teacher. So an actual belief. Even though we go to teachers' college for the same amount of time, you have to, our academic board here is called the NZQA. The NZQA level of qualification for an early childhood teacher is the same level as it is for a primary school teacher. You're not dumber, but society's perception is. So if we just call them brains 1, 2, 3, and 4, we might buy into that. So
Mm.
I would always say to parents, it's because we're informed by neuroscience, especially in early childhood. So we're very aware of the neurosequential model, which I
Yeah.
know can be really disengaging, but it's essentially the four brains in your head that work from bottom to
Mm.
top, brain 1, 2, 3, 4. And yep, we all want to get to brain 4, but you know what I'm saying? You show them you know the words, so you establish validity, but then you make it as simple as possible to
Yeah.
understand. So they know you're clever, but you know more. You have that in your pocket to be able to pull out.
Nice. We might work with you on that to like visualize that and maybe provide a resource, or you may have
Yep,
resources as well. That'll
yep,
be
yep, yep.
really cool. I mean,
I mean, I've got a picture of scales with cortex on one side and brainstem on the other, and that's the standard part of my presentation when I present to
yeah,
people, because it is the part of the foundation for parents to understand. And
yeah.
I think using stories that they can all relate to, they know they'll have memories of themselves when their parents yelling at them. Did they know the answer to stuff? And if
Mm.
they go into an environment where it's unfamiliar, and if they were made to read out loud in class before they could, everyone will have a story from the trauma from school where they were put in a place where their brainstem took over. Speech competitions. You
Mm.
stand at home, you memorize your whole speech, you got it perfectly down pat, you're confident as in front of the mirror, and then you stand up in front of the class and go, and because the speech is in your cortex, and
Mm.
when you stand up in front of the class, your brainstem takes over. So I
Yeah.
think giving them examples like that they can relate to helps them to understand it.
Nice.
Mm.
Now, Nathan, we'll do a bit of a sum up in a second, but I just want to
Yeah,
point everyone to the fact that we are now going to enter Q&A territory. So
cool, excellent.
please, if you have any questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat, and then we'll get to them with Nathan in the remaining 7 minutes. But Nathan, really quickly, how do you talk to families about school readiness
Yeah,
and the perception that they may have around what school readiness really is?
yeah. I mean, it relates to lots of what we're talking about today. I mean, it's difficult because it is a complex topic. You have to, to try and get them to understand that they're culturally informed, not research informed.
Mm.
And it's made more difficult because you've got, in New Zealand, we have nurses, not early childhood teachers, nurses coming into early childhood centres to assess whether they're ready for school. And with not being educated in education, they come in and they do their hearing and their vision, but they also test, can you write your name? Do you know the colours? They essentially assess what education would say are 7-year-old behaviours in the
Mm.
4-year-old. And then the parents get that report back. So that's them telling the parents, this is what matters, writing your name, knowing the colours, knowing the numbers. You've got to be a research informed parent to be
Mm.
able to know, like I did. I don't care what those, I care about the hearing and stuff, but I don't care about that. I care about things like the pre-literacy, like I said about my grandson making up his own symbol for what poem means. Um, but most parents aren't going to have that. So when we talk about school readiness, I think it goes back to that conversation that hopefully you've talked to them already about dispositions.
Mm.
I would literally get a primary school teacher in to do a parent evening. That a primary school teacher that that's a new entrance teacher that understands play and understands all this stuff isn't just a government employee who wants early childhood centres to be little primary schools that get them ready for primary school, but an early childhood teacher, and there's lots of them that know about the importance of play, that understand the power of dispositions. They can come in and reassure all those parents, and it's not just early childhood teachers saying that, but at primary school, we need to know that the kid can open their own lunchbox, that
Mm.
they can make social contact with other people, that they can persevere through failure, so regulate their emotions a bit. The literacy and the numeracy will come later, and the naturally doesn't develop until somewhere between 7 and 8.
Mm.
I mean, those are the strategies when we talk about school readiness. But I mean, in general, it's what I said at the start. When they come in and say, why aren't you the centre down the road, sitting them down at desks and doing literacy and numeracy with 4-year-olds?
Mm.
Why aren't you doing that?
Mm.
Where's your school readiness program? You have to be confident in the fact that your school readiness program is based on actual research. So I would
Mm.
say, oh, we do that, because in a free play environment, you would still probably have a station set up where the children can choose to go and learn how to write their name, or to how to write mum's name, or, you know, I learned to write because I had a crush on the girl across the road. So my first thing I learned to write was, to the girl across the road, I love you. But for ages it was, but I got the I and the R mixed up. So it was actually, to the grill across the road, I love you. But that's what motivated. I had no interest in literacy until that. Yeah, so you'll have a station set up to learn to write their name, or to write their cards to who they want to. But the thing is, the children choose to go over there. You know, we have symbols around all the time that, so it's, like that power example I used with the stick in the mud. But kids using symbols. Love hearts is a symbol. They're doing cards and stuff. They're writing love hearts to mum on Mother's Day. That's literacy, because they're using the shape of a love heart to represent love and stuff. I would say, basically what I'm trying to say to those parents is, yes, we are doing school readiness, and you'll find that every early childhood centre is doing both. They're trying to develop the positive dispositions, and they're trying to develop the behaviours that you see on the surface. The centres that cater more to the parents and are more, I think, focused on financial success and getting up their numbers are going to focus more on the end of pleasing the parents and having a kid that can write their name and know the colour of the numbers. A centre that's really focused on creating human beings who are going to have a quality experience of life are going to also have that in stations and stuff, but they're going to be far more focused on empowering the child and empowering the child's dispositions that will set them up for a lifetime full of successful learning. So yeah, I think it all comes back to relationships. You have to have the relationship with the parents so that they value what you say, and they listen.
I think, like, as you're speaking, one of the pieces that I feel like, and I'm reflecting on my own journey here, it's like, some of the things that we could have done better is, done better, let's be honest, is, maybe even having these conversations with families and, like, really opening this up, having forums for the conversations, but also, like, as you said, like, ways of communicating, because, and I think this is a human bias, right? Like, our memory really starts, we can really recall probably, like, what is it, like 7, 8, 9 is like where we can really start to recall more vividly. And that's where our formation of education comes from, right? And so as a parent, I'm right. That's education. But, like, there's probably a role for us to play in going, hey, like, here are the positive dispositions that we really want to work with your child to support, and here's what they lead to. And that communication probably, I'm reflecting on my journey, we could have probably done that better and help families go, wow, okay, if this center in the first 5 years works with my child to develop a positive disposition towards resilience, then that's going to mean, in primary, my child will, experiment more, fail more, pick themselves up better. That's going to lead to X, Y, and Z. And, in later in life, we're going to see this. And I think, like, helping them see how that, because I think that anxiety of, like, I want
to be the best parent possible. I want to give my kids everything. I don't want to screw this up. This isn't like a job I can just walk away from and get another job or shift to another city. This is the big thing. This is parenting. And so that's what I mean. You have to acknowledge that with parents and go, well done you for having that. And we know how important it is. And we're on that journey with you. And so you need to really reassure them if we find a way that is evidence-based and research-based that shows good outcomes, has real evidence, we're absolutely all over top of that. But, sitting your 2-year-old down to read is not what that is.
So interesting.
Yeah.
Hey, now, Nathan,
I think you hit the nail on the head. Sorry, I think you hit the nail on the head with saying we only start to remember things about 7 or 8. So people do think education's all a frontal cortex. And that, like, the earlier they get that frontal cortex ready, they don't understand the foundations of learning. That's why I always come back to those 4 brains and get them to understand that, 2 to 8 social, emotional, limbic system.
I mean, so many takeaways from today, Nathan, and I just want to thank you so much for your time. Andrea had a bit of a sum up that I'm going to read, because I think you did a great job, Andrea, of summing this up. So to sum up, for what are the leadership lessons? Number 1, dispositions of learning are important to scaffold. And, we talked about the difference between knowledge, skills, and dispositions, which I think is really great. One thing I might add on to that as well, Andrea, is, how that maps to the developing brain and Nathan's 1, 2, 3, 4 model. And number 3 being the limbic system, and that, that emotional brain and how we feel about our learning. and how that's like really how we support positive disposition. It seems like if we can really support positive experience around and positive relationship to those things as well, I think seems to be number one. Free play needs to be advocated for. I think we're all here agree with that one. That's great. And how, this point around linking the work that we do to the child's brain and development, I think, and that communication, I think is a big takeaway as well. Nathan, anything else you want to add to that?
Maybe we're running out of time and I don't have time to add. What I'd like to start with next time is just the 1, 2, 3 step method for better communication with kids. So number 3 is a thing called cognitive training, the number 1 evidence-based way to actually change behavior. So it's a very effective teaching tool. Number 1 is how you calm the brainstem. This could have been a 4-stage model, but I've just made it simpler by making it a 3-stage model. So combine brains 1 and 2. Number 1, calm the brainstem. Number 2, validate the emotions. And I said about for parents how you need to validate when they want you to teach the 2-year-old to read. You validate that, oh, it's so good that you're an involved parent. And then number 3, cognitive training. So I wouldn't be able to do them justice now. So I think maybe if we start next time and just actually teaching that communication model, and then we can go into the discussions, because I think that's valuable for parents and for kids. And it's actually valuable to your whole communication skill for every other single human being or mammal that you interact with for the rest of your life. So it's a good one. So I had it down for today, but it's hard to get it all into 1 hour, isn't it?
Awesome. Well, hey, for all of those who are interested we'll change the next webinar to really be focused on that one, Nathan. So for anyone who's interested in seeing that, there's a registration button there. Remember, you can bring your friends, your whānau, your families from your service would benefit from these conversations as well. I wouldn't be afraid of sending some of this as a resource so that they can see the depth of the conversation that we're having, as early childhood educators. I guarantee you secondary school teachers are not having the same kind of conversation. So I think them seeing the nature of the conversation is so powerful. Therese, you asked, can you rewatch this? Yes, you'll get a link in your email. But for everyone here, thank you so much for joining. Remember, this is part of a series that we're doing with Nathan. So this is just a part of the journey that we're going on to unpack this great man's mind and help us empower ourselves to create the outcomes we want for children and for the world. So Nathan, thank you so much for sharing this off so authentically and
cheers, brother.
Sharing the learnings. And see you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye. Bye. Ka kite.